Hello friends. Today I'm going to talk about how to do market research for your novel either before you write it or when you finished it and you're trying to figure out where to position it in the marketplace. I really recommend, if you haven't already finished a novel, to do the market research before you write the novel. Even if you're not planning to write to market, it might suggest to you some things that you could tweak. If you're a reasonably decent business person, you know that market research is important, but I still think this aspect is somewhat overlooked. Like, often the process is considered to be you write the book and then you market the book. But there's this other step that I think is just as important, and that is the market research, which will smooth your path to marketing the book so that it's not so difficult. So what am I talking about when I talk about market research? It's understanding what readers want and expect in the particular niche that you are writing in. So for example, when I wrote the Cursed Soul trilogy, it was my first foray into adult fantasy romance. It had some steamy scenes, it had adult characters, it had adult themes. I had read some books like this just as a reader, but the indie scene was still pretty new. It was 2016, especially in like fantasy romance. That was kind of just bubbling up. So I saw some books that were selling well, and I did research, like what did their covers look like? What did their blurbs sound like? Before I even wrote The Sorcerer's Concubine, I tried to position it in such a way that I thought would sell, and I kind of worked the idea around what was selling. I just knew that I wanted to write a book set in my Hidden Lands world, but I wanted it to be marketable, so I did all this research. And I still failed at some things because I hadn't spent a ton of time in the romance genre, so I just completely misunderstood some aspects of romance. But that is my best-selling book in my own fantasy world. And I think the reason why is because I wrote it to market while still maintaining elements of my fantasy world. But I knew I could position it in the market. So how did I do this research? My greatest tool was just looking around Amazon. And Amazon used to have some better available information than they have now. And truly, when you hear about these websites that the most important part of you being on them is just to get your data, I really understand that, because data is worth serious money. The data that Amazon used to give us that they no longer do give us was something I used constantly, and it has been years since they pulled some of these features, and I still mourn the loss of them because they were so important to my career strategy. One thing that they used to have was something called the author rank. You'll see the books have a rank for how well they're selling, but they used to have each genre showed the top 100 authors in that genre. And this was an incredible tool for figuring out what was hot, because if you just looked at the top 100 authors and you saw somebody in that list that only had a couple of books, or they had maybe one trilogy and the covers weren't even that great, but they were still in the top 100 authors, then you knew pretty much instantly that whatever they were writing was hot. But they don't have that anymore, and they haven't had it for years. So the main thing I'm going to talk about here is how I use Amazon to do market research on books. But before you get to Amazon, you might also want to do some other things. Familiarize yourself in a more reader community way. So I'm going to talk about that a little too. And if you're new here, my name is Lydia Foxglove. I've been a full-time fantasy author for the most part since 2009. I started out in traditional publishing, and then I moved into indie publishing, where I spent some time doing fantasy and paranormal romance to market, and now I'm trying to sell more of a real fantasy series with very involved world building, characters I've been writing about for decades. That's a little more of a personal project. So I have been in many different segments of the business, and sorry for the light that keeps kind of bursting in on me. And I've always tried to do a lot of research. Even when I was traditionally published, I would always be looking at those publishers' marketplace announcements to see what was selling. And one would assume that if you're going to be writing a genre, that you are probably a fan of that genre to some extent, and you probably know at least some of the hot titles or your favorite books in that genre. One would maybe assume that, but that is not always true. For a little while, I was writing reverse harem romance, and it was like a brand new genre. So I had not read any of it because there were only like 20 books that had all come out in like the last few months or something. And they all kind of mostly sounded pretty bad. Like I read one, but that's not really market research, reading one book. Mostly I was just like, I've watched a lot of anime, so I'm just going to jump in and try it. And even when reverse harem got more popular, honestly, I did not read a lot of it, which probably was why I was never the most popular reverse harem author, because I was mostly just doing my own thing based on anime that I liked, whereas the genre is kind of taking on its own tropes and forms beneath my feet, and I didn't keep up with it because I didn't really like actually reading reverse harem. But you know what? I still made a decent amount of money writing it, so sometimes you might decide to get into a genre that you are not a fan of. I hate to say that because no one wants to think that their favorite authors don't even read the genre they're writing, but I've known quite a few authors who were just like, this looks hot, I'm gonna look at it and see if I can write it. You know, I'm all about the grim truth on this channel. But let's assume that in most cases, you are at least somewhat of a fan of this genre. So you might want to start by just making a little mental list of books that are somewhat known and popular in the genre and also would be good comp titles for your book. If you're still getting a bit acquainted with the genre and what readers like about it, one of the best things to do is just to follow readers on social media, whatever your preferred platform is, whether it's TikTok, Bookstagram, Booktubers, Facebook groups where readers hang out, Reddit groups where readers hang out. There's usually particular genre groups for every like subgenre of like fantasy novels or romance, mysteries, etc. So you could hang out at those groups for a little while and just see like what books are people talking about, what tropes are people talking about or themes. Currently my books probably match closest to cozy fantasy, the ones I'm writing that are set in my fantasy world. They're not perfect because I did not write them to market. That's kind of the whole point of what I'm doing right now, is that I'm just doing my own thing. But generally I think of them as comfort reads, a lot of slice of life scenes, stakes that are not super world-endingly high in most cases, humor, like cute romances that don't have a lot of spice, maybe just a touch, and also a lot of like found family friendship type stuff along with the romance. So it doesn't have like this super obsessed focused romance plot, more so like just a whole community. Those things all match best with cozy fantasy. So I tend to follow the cozy fantasy Reddit because that is the best place I've found for information on cozy fantasy. And I see any new posts that pop up there so that I can see what books do people recommend over and over again and what things do people ask for over and over again. Maybe there's something that there's not really a book out about it and people keep asking for it. So I'll just make a little mental note of that, and it doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to write it, but if it happens to fit something that I have going on in my fantasy world, that's something I can make a mental note of, like, oh, this is something that my book has that people want. I talked about this recently in my video about writing the blurb or summary for my book, The Potion Dealers. I looked at the cozy fantasy Reddit for a little while to see if there was anything that was in that book that people were asking for, and I realized that people like books in cozy fantasy where the characters are like smart and a little nerdy about something, like a little bit more of an intellectual romance like we get in Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, is a popular book in the cozy fantasy genre, and the leads are both kind of like scholarly and academic and share a mutual interest in like researching fairy lore. And The Potion Dealers has some of those kind of themes because the main character is a dealer in magical potions and artifacts and objects, mostly illegal ones, although sometimes legal ones too, you know, whatever makes money. But what makes him kind of special is that he is truly and genuinely really into the craft of making magic, and he loves talking to the sorcerers who make these objects and potions, and his enthusiasm is kind of what helps him stay in the business despite some various disadvantages. And I got the idea to like kind of highlight that part of his character after looking at the Cozy Fantasy Reddit and seeing that people would kind of mention that like kind of academia or like nerdy character aspect in a lot of cozy fantasies. So just keeping up with your genre is a great idea, and always with that mind for what are people asking for and what are people excited about in the books that are out right now. And then keep a mental note of the books that are most like yours that people talk about and recommend. Now, as you're hanging out in these reader spaces, you might start to gather up a list of books that kind of remind you of your book. Like, even if your niche is like romantasy, there's so many different types of romantasy. So you might start to gather up a particular list of comp titles in your brain that match yours the closest. They're probably books that you liked, or at least books that really, really remind you of what you write, even if there was something about them that you didn't personally like. And they're books that maybe share some similar tropes or settings or vibes. Keep a mental note of like 5 of those books, and preferably they should be as new as possible. And write them down, and we're going to use those when we go over to Amazon for the most nitpicky part of our market research. My book is kind of a hard book to sell. It really doesn't have comp titles because it's, for one thing, it's set in a 1960s influenced fantasy world, which, as far as I can tell, there's barely any books that have ever been written in any fantasy genre that have 1960s vibes. But these are the titles that I think have some things in common with mine, is Megan Bannon's book set in Tanria. This is the most recent one, The Undermining of Twyla and Frank. The Emily Wilde books, as mentioned, this is the most recent Emily Wilde book because you have like kind of that Studio Ghibli charming male lead and lots of character development. Half a Soul. This one did not come out very recently anymore, but I still like the overall vibe of this one reminded me of my books, even though it is more of like a Regency fairy tale setting, which is somewhat different. But vibes-wise, it did kind of remind me of what I write. And then just to have a couple more, I don't own them yet because they're so new, but I'm going to add in The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst, because everybody's talking about that book lately in the cozy fantasy genre. So it's good to have like one of those big books that everybody's talking about. And then I'm also going to add in Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher, because that is another one I've seen people talking about lately. And I've already seen someone compare my book to it. So even though I haven't read it, I better get on it. So those are going to be my 5 titles. Whatever your genre is, make your list of 5 comp titles for your book based on seeing what readers are talking about, and preferably you will have read these books. It is a really good idea to read a few books in your genre, even if it means taking out a little extra time from your writing to do some reading. After all, it's not too much of a chore to have a little bit of a reading break. And if you're here at this video, you might be thinking in general that it's time to level up your writing. Maybe you're struggling with marketing, like, I still am after 9 years of doing this because it is always changing. Or maybe you feel like your writing craft isn't quite where you want it to be. If you're feeling like that, I have a really cool opportunity to tell you about. It is a 2-week virtual authors conference called Inkerscon, and it is specifically geared toward helping indie authors succeed. Starting on June 7th, they're kicking off the digital launch of this year's conference. With your digital access pass, you'll get the entire curriculum of classes from this year, with topics on everything from building up a 6-figure author business to running targeted ads on some different platforms, to showing emotion in characters and perfecting your dialogue. I am looking at the lineup and I recognize a lot of authors on their curriculum that I already know of based on their book catalogs and their web presence, and these classes look excellent. In addition to getting these 24 classes taught by bestsellers and industry experts, you'll get invited to a ton of interactive online events like Q&As with best-selling authors, writing sprint sessions, networking events, author roundtables, and a lot more. It's really easy to register, and I even have a $50 off coupon for you guys. Thank you to those of you who are already registered. Thank you for supporting the channel. You'll get the entire curriculum and all the events for only $199, which I think is a really great price for all the content. Honestly, I've been to some online conferences similar to this, like in past years, and I came away from them feeling really fired up, really ready to like level up my marketing and my writing. So if you're in that point where you are really ready to get to work and feel fired up about it, I would say check out Inkerscon. And honestly, I paid like twice what this costs to go to a conference. Click the link in the description and use my code COZYCreative25. Now I'm going to take you over to Amazon and I'm going to show you how I do market research on Amazon. So we're going to move to screen view, and I did not do like I'm just doing this video in real time. I did not do any previous research like to see what I was going to get when I looked it up. So I'm going into this blind, trying to tell what are like the trends, what is really selling. And I also want to note here, you may be thinking, I want to go wide. Amazon is not going to be my only storefront. I actually want to do a lot of different venues for my books. And I do too. I am not a Kindle exclusive author. But the one thing about Amazon is that they still have the biggest pool of information on what is selling. And yes, there are some books that do better on the other platforms than they do on Amazon, but generally for most people, Amazon is still going to be the best way to tell what's doing well. And they're just so big. You don't have to shop on Amazon, but they're still the best place to go for your information, at least as of this video. Like I said, they used to be a lot better, but what can you do? So let's go to Amazon and see what's hot. Okay, so here we are at Amazon, and the way that I would start to research titles, like what's hot in my kind of micro niche, is just to put in these titles that you've compiled from your other research or that you've read recently and you know kind of match. Yeah, I think I said Map of the Other Lands was the most recent one because I'm holding it, but actually it's Compendium of Lost Tales is the recent one. So that's the one we want to look at. Just around the audio version. You probably want to go to the Kindle version because as an indie writer, your main sales are going to be in ebook form usually, although hard copies are becoming more popular, but still, let's start with the Kindle version and just see like, okay, so what else is popping up here? Hey, disheveled editing Lydia here to add, I did not really clarify. What you're looking for here is the customers who also bought, otherwise known as the also bots. And you want to make sure that these are not the ones that say sponsored at the bottom, not the ones that people are doing paid advertising for, but the organic also bots. This is another thing that Amazon used to have more of the also bots. Now they've cut down the amount, and they're also sometimes they don't even appear at all. They just give you ads. So make sure that you find those also bots. If they're not showing them to you, you might have to get out a different device and look up the book, because different devices will kind of have different things on different days. I don't know. And you can tell by the price points that most of these are probably traditionally published because they're all running like traditional published prices. So it's good to look at what's selling regularly, but ideally you would want to find if there's any indie published books. So just going through this, so far, they don't look like there's any indie published books. But another thing that you can do while you're doing this is scroll down and see what categories pop up. Cozy Fantasy does not have a category on Amazon, but some types of books will. So if you go to fairy tales in the Kindle store, that can be a popular place for indie books that might be in that kind of cozy adjacent space. Of course, you're also going to see like your dark and spicy fairy tales here too. This cover to me looks like it might be an indie publish because it's only $5.99 and it has a cover that looks a little more cozy. But then we click on it and it's actually spicy. So maybe not so cozy after all. And this is just like what you're going to be doing is just wandering around and looking for things that look like they might be what you want, and then reading the descriptions and seeing if they actually sound anything like what you're trying to do. But just in doing this, you'll get a sense for like, all right, so here's the kind of covers that are selling in fairy tale retellings. You can see that object covers have still remained very strong here. We're not seeing as many with people anymore. Whereas when I started in indie publishing, it would have been mostly people at this point. So this is one of the only ones I've seen with people covers. What I write is not really a fairy tale, so I'm going to get off of this for now. And I'm going to try putting in one of the other books. Now, Half a Soul, I saw that in here. That one was already on my list. Let's see what's in the customers also bought for that one. So here we also see The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, which is another one that I had on my list. But are we seeing any indie published books here? Ones with a price point that's probably going to be $5.99 or less. Now, there are indie published books that price themselves higher, but usually they run a little cheaper. So here's one. I've seen this pop up a little bit. What Comes of Attending the Commoner's Ball. This one is actually in my also bots for the potion dealers. So this is where I definitely want to be paying attention. What does this cover look like? It's an object cover. It's kind of whimsical. And then you're going to look at what is this description. Hester Flanders went to the ball for the food. She didn't expect a prince to follow her home. So we got a fun little tagline. And we've got Cinderella meets Howl's Moving Castle in this cozy fantasy romance from debut author Elizabeth Amy Brown. Pick up your copy and whirl away into a whimsical story of glittering gas lamps, frisky folk, and huggable hogs. So right here, you're kind of seeing some tropes that are working. The gas lamp subgenre mashed with cozy fantasy. Oops, sorry for some email sounds coming in there. Frisky folk, so you got like the fae, and huggable hogs, that's just something for a bit of that whimsy that a lot of cozy fantasy books have. Now we can look at customers who bought this item also bought. And then we can see, also if you're not sure if it's indie published, the publisher here is Metaphorical Cello Press. That definitely sounds like an independent publisher. It is not one of the big publishers that would be publishing this sort of thing, like Orbit or Del Rey or Tor, or, any of these more major publishers. So we see some books here. These do have a lot of people covers. So I'm going to click on one. If she can remove the monster's mask, she will earn her freedom. Now, this looks like this is more like fairy tale stuff. Not quite what I do. So I'm gonna back out of this particular track I'm on. And this is something I'll do a lot when I'm doing research. I'll just start clicking on things and I'll kind of follow them as deep as I can until I feel like I'm not on the road that I want to be on anymore. Here's another one that might be self-published. The Road of Bones, an epic and immersive Viking-inspired romantic fantasy. As you're looking, another thing you can pay attention to, how many ratings does it have? If it has a ton, like 1,000 or more, you can probably guess it sold pretty well at some point. So that's another way you can start to tell which books are kind of doing well versus just not quite hitting. And, a book that has hundreds of reviews probably still did pretty well, but it's always possible that that author was just really good at gathering up a review team and that they didn't actually get that many sales. When you break into the thousands, that's where you can tell, like, it's hard to get a review team of 1,000 people, whereas you might be able to get 100 or 200 people on your review team. This one has a whole little trope menu posted right here, so you can see what this one has going on. This is obviously aiming for more of a romantasy crowd. And then I'm also looking here, what categories is this in? Like this one is in romantic fantasy. Obviously a huge category, and most of these are going to be romantasy books, not like cozier stuff. But it doesn't hurt to browse sort of adjacent genres to what you might be marketing, just to see like what's on there. When you're browsing just general book pages and they're also bots, you're looking for books that have a lot of reviews, things that are popular. But when I'm browsing the bestsellers, I'm often looking for books that actually don't have a lot of reviews because I want to see like what new thing is popping off, if anything. So as I'm looking, everything's got like 10,000 reviews. Everything's really popular unless it's yet another edition of The Fourth Wing. But here's one that only has 173. So that makes me curious. What's the deal with this book? For fans of Once Upon a Time and Wicked, this one is ranked 388 in the Kindle store. It's doing very well, but it just came out. So if I'm looking to see what's doing well, I'm going to note, okay, this one just came out. It is having a really strong debut. Is it still going to be there next week? That's the other component to this, is you're not just going to want to look once. You're going to want to come back and see what's still there in a week or a month. Because if you're doing this ahead of time, you can kind of hit this list a few times and see what changes. A lot of these books have been on these lists for ages. Like romantic fantasy has these big books that just stay in the top for a long time. So there's not a lot of surprises here. Now you can also just look at all the subcategories in fantasy, and you can kind of just browse any that seem somewhat applicable to your genre. Like my book is kind of humorous, so what's going on in humor? This is going to be like kind of chaos. You're going to have all sorts of things in humor because like anything could be funny and it could also be another genre at the same time. But I'm just going to browse these and see if there's anything here that looks similar to what I write. Like I see these books by Delumhawk. I don't know how you're supposed to say their name, but they come up a lot on the cozy communities, but they've also been around a while and they started out on like Royal Road or something like that. So it's going to be hard to just kind of pop in and replicate that kind of success. Like here's one by Stephanie Holmes, Dead and Stormy Night. I remember Stephanie Holmes from some of the author communities that I have been a part of over the years. The cover is very cute. I could see using a cover like this for one of my books too. And then you've got the list of what this one has going on. Love interests are famous villains from classic literature, magical bookshop, disabled rep from a blind author, grumpy sunshine, they fall first, raven shifter, mysteries to solve, morally gray book boyfriends, and kooky spooky humor. So I'm going to make a note, mental note. Here's a kind of list of things for a book that is long series that has been out for a while, but it's still holding its own, still performing well on the bestseller lists. So basically, this is what I do when I'm doing research. I just poke around Amazon. I look at top 100 lists, and I look at books, and then I look at what other books appear as they're also bots. And then I go back and do it again in like a week. Like if I'm in hardcore research mode, because one thing that can happen, like this book right here, it's on the list. It's priced at 99 cents. So this might mean that it's new and it's at a promotional price, or it might mean that this author is running a big promo on it. They might have gotten a BookBub featured deal and are marking it down to 99 cents. And you know, this series, I like this cover. It looks like a cute little book. And they're recommending it to readers of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. So this might not be a bad comp title for some of my books, but we also can't really tell based on this if this book is really popular because it's 99 cents right now. And it might be priced that way for a promotion, and then like 2 days from now, they might pop the price back up to a regular price, but it's going to hold its rank briefly. Even though it's priced normally, it'll take a couple days usually for the rank to totally fall. So you don't always get the best picture just from one day because you're going to see like various like promotional efforts that will influence the ranks. That's why you kind of want to come back and look again later and see if they've changed and what's sticking. So to summarize, the things I'm really trying to find are books that are hot by new authors that are sticking on the list that indicates there's like kind of a trend. There's something a new author has tapped into. Well, I said new, but it also could apply to like a not really big author. Basically, you're trying to sort out the people who have a huge following and any book that they publish is going to do well, because that's not really applicable. But like, if I published a really hot book tomorrow, then that would be a surprise because I haven't had a hot book in quite a while. So you can look at the author's back catalog and see, like, have they had any other recent hits as well. But yeah, you're basically trying to find like a book that kind of popped off out of nowhere. Or older books that are not super new anymore, but are really hanging in there on the list for a while, indicating that that is kind of an evergreen thing that readers keep wanting what that book has to offer over and over and over. And that gives me an idea by looking at those two factors of what is really resonating with my readers. And then I might read some of these books if they look like they're going to be a good comp title for my book. You can do this with any genre, and I recommend, spending a good several hours on it and making some notes, because it will really give you a better sense of what readers are looking for. I think that's all I have to say on this topic for today. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any other tips or tricks for getting a sense of what is selling in the market. And of course, the more you wrote your book to be quirky and off market, the more you're going to struggle with comp titles like I am currently doing with the potion dealers. But that's part of the decision-making process. That's why it's good to know at least what is popular so that you can decide how much you want to work that into your book or not. This microphone just keeps dragging my dress down. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give me a like. If you're new here, my channel is about the creative life in general, the emotional, the practical, the financial sides of it, as well as the writing business in particular. And if you want more from me, I have a Patreon and a Substack, as well as YouTube memberships. Patreon and Substack both have a free tier, and if you want bonus videos from me, I do 2 bonus videos a month voted on by you guys that are posted on all the platforms. And if you want to read any of my books and support the channel, that link is in the description as well. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye!